Welcome to today's Magical Roots Magic webinar. My name is Michael Booth, and I'm Vice President of RootsMagic and one of its developers. And also with us this afternoon is the Roots Magician himself, Bruce Busby. And Bruce, of course, is the President of RootsMagic and its author. Now, RootsMagic 5 is the latest version of our award-winning software which makes family history easy. And based on user feedback and requests, we've added several new reports and many new report options. And today we'll look at these new reports and options and how RootsMagic 5 can make sharing and publishing your family history easier than ever. And with that introduction, I will turn the time over to Bruce.
Hey, thanks for joining us. Okay, so as Mike mentioned, today's webinar is about the new reports and the new report options that we've added in RootsMagic. Now, we've actually, several of the reports that we've actually added in RootsMagic, we've actually had complete webinars on those. That would be the CountyCheck Report, the research logs, and the Who Was There report. So those three reports I am going to cover, but I'm just kind of lightly cover them. I'm not going to go into full detail on those three reports because you can always go back and watch those three webinars on those three features and see those in much more detail. But let's go ahead and talk about those three. We'll get started with them. Okay, so the first report that we want to talk about is what's called the CountyCheck Report. Now, one of the features that we added in RootsMagic 5 is the CountyCheck feature. And that's a feature where when you go into a person's edit screen and type in a place and a date, RootsMagic will check to see whether or not that particular place, that county, that state, that country existed on that date. And if it did, everything goes great. And if it didn't, RootsMagic displays a message saying, hey, that county or state or country did not exist on that date. Either it hadn't been created yet, or it may have already been dissolved by that time. So the CountyCheck Report is a report that we've added, and the way you can get to that is by clicking on the little printer and then going into Lists, and it's going to be right here, the CountyCheck. Now, the place that this is useful is if you don't want to have to go in and edit each individual place that you've already created just to see whether or not a place existed or not, or if you happen to have turned this feature off because you don't like it popping up as you're entering data. In either case, the CountyCheck gives you the option, the CountyCheck Report gives you the option of going right in and seeing the results for all the places in your file all at once. Now, there's several different options. There's the errors, the matches, and the suggestions. The errors is the one where it's going to show you counties or states or countries that didn't exist at the time of that event. And you can just select that one, click Generate Report, and you're going to get a report of those places that didn't exist on the date you entered that. Now, this report can sometimes, on a large database, can take a while to generate. Okay, and you can see that these places, this county wasn't created until that particular date. Now, there's several other options, as I mentioned. Matches. If you select matches, that's going to show you minor corrections to those place names. In other words, that's where it's going to recommend, hey, maybe you should put the name of the country on the end, things like that. Suggestions is going to be when you have place names that can be ambiguous. If you entered a particular city that was in a state, or a particular county that was in a state, and for some reason that was ambiguous, this is going to help make suggestions for that. The final thing I want to cover on this before we move on is this people to include. By default, it's going to look at everyone, but you can actually say, I want to select it from a list. And so you can actually create a list of people, and RootsMagic will only look at their places for this report. So if you have a huge database, this helps you filter that down so that you can have a smaller list that will actually generate quicker. The place that can be useful is if you only wanted to look for places for your direct ancestors or for everyone with a certain last name. Now, that basically is going to be the CountyCheck feature. Again, as I mentioned in the CountyCheck webinar, this is only for the United States, United Kingdom, Canadian, and Australian counties, provinces, and states. That's basically because that's the only data that currently is available to us. As other data becomes available, we'll expand CountyCheck to include other countries as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the next report, and that is going to be the research logs. Now, to get to the research logs, you're going to go into the report dialog just like you did before, but you're going to select Research Reports, and you're going to choose Research Log, and you're going to ask it to create it. And RootsMagic needs mainly one piece of information, and that is which research log do you want to print. So you say select log, you choose the research log that you want, and you'll get a list of all your research logs. You'll select that, and then you choose how you want that research log's items to be sorted. You can sort them by date, goal, the source, the repository, or your results, and you can choose which columns, which fields you actually want to print for the report, and you can just generate that report. If you want to see the whole thing across, this is a fairly low resolution, but you can fit the page, and so you can see the whole page up there. Now, that one option I mentioned, this one right here where you're choosing which columns, that's letting you choose which of these columns. So if for some reason you don't want the reference number column, you can turn that off, and it gives you a little bit more room for some of the other information you have for that research log. If you wanted to see more details about printing the research logs, I recommend watching the webinar on research managers and research logs. There's a whole webinar on how to enter this data and then how to print it and how to get that information out. Okay, the third report that I'm going to quickly cover is going to be under the list, and it's going to be the last one in the list. It's going to be alphabetical, the Who Was There list. And again, we had a webinar just on this specific list. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. The Who Was There list is a very powerful list. Now, if you happen to run your RootsMagic 5 and don't see this list in your group of reports, what that means is you haven't downloaded the latest update, because we just very recently added this list. If you don't see that, what you're going to want to do is when you run RootsMagic, look down here at the status bar, down here at the bottom, and look at that little right-hand corner, that lower right-hand corner, and it should say Update Available. And you'll just click on that, and that will update your version 5 point whatever to the current, most recent 5.0.3.1 at this time, and that will have this particular report. It's always good to stick with the latest versions of the program. We fix bugs as we go along, and we add new features as we did with the Who Was There list. Now, this list has a lot of options, and again, I recommend watching that webinar because we tell you how this particular report can be used for things like finding the people who were in a particular area during a census, how you can find people who lived in an area during a war, how you can find people who lived in an area that you may be going to the courthouse, and you want a list of those people who may have been in that area at the time. At its most basic, you just enter the place and the date. So if I wanted to find everyone who lived in Ames, Iowa, possibly in 1940, let's say I wanted to find people who might have been there for the 1940 census, I just enter the place and the date, and I generate the report. And let's go ahead and narrow that. And it's going to give me an alphabetical list of everybody who may have been in Ames, Iowa in 1940. It's going to show the age that they would have been in 1940, and it's going to show all of the places, all the events in their life that were in that particular location along with the date. It'll also give you options for showing married dates and alternate or married names and alternate names and things like that. When it does the married names for women, it's going to pick the married name they were most likely to have been known as on this date. So if they were married multiple times, it's going to show you the married name that would have been happened most recently before that date you selected. Okay, again, like I say, there's some other options. You can, draw lines between the rows to make things stand out better. You can filter this report just like you could with the CountyCheck report. You can choose minimum age and maximum age. So if you wanted to say, I only wanted people who were between the age of 16 and 30 on that date in that place, you can do that as well. Okay, so that's the who was there list. Okay, so that covers the 3 reports that we've actually done full webinars on. So if you want to see more details on those, I recommend checking out the webinars on those particular reports. So let's go ahead now, and we're going to jump into some of the reports and report options that we haven't actually done webinars on that are new in RootsMagic. Now, one of the reports that we've added here is under lists, and it's called the On This Day list. And this is actually just kind of a fun report. And I'm going to go in, I'm going to click on that On This Day report, and all you really need to do is pick a day. It might be somebody's birthday, it might be a particular day that's important to you or to your family. So you can pick any day. I'm just going to go ahead and pick the 4th of July. You don't pick the year, because what you're doing is you're asking for a list of things that happened on this date, and regardless of what year it's in. And you have 4 different categories that you can choose from. Family events tells RootsMagic to print all of the events from your own personal database that happened on that date. So if all you really wanted was a list of things that happened in your database on a particular date, just come in here and check that. But what we've done is we've added another database in the program that RootsMagic has access to that will actually also show you famous births, famous deaths, and historical events on that day as well. So if you wanted to make up a report to give to somebody for their birthday, this is where you can use for that. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to generate the report. You'll see in my database here, this sample fake database, there's only one event that happened on July 4th, and that would have been this person's death in 1946. Okay, now it moves on to famous births because I asked for that. So as I scroll down, I can look and see famous people that were actually born on the 4th of July. Calvin Coolidge, okay, Rube Goldberg. Okay, so you can see now there may be a lot of people. Mitch Miller. There may be some people on this list that you've never heard of. Okay, here's Dear Abby and Ann Landers. They were born on the 4th of July. Okay, if you want to create a version of this file that doesn't have quite as many places or people, you'll see there's a lot of information in here. Okay, there's a lot of famous births. Same thing with famous deaths. There's a lot of famous deaths. Okay, you may say, I'm not sure who Luitpold Margrave of Bavaria is. I don't really need that. Well, if you want to create a version of this report that doesn't have all of this, what you can do is come up here and click on Save, and then just tell it, save this to a rich text file. That will open this report up in your word processor, and you can then go and you can delete rows, delete famous births, famous deaths, and historical events that you don't really want, and so you can kind of slim this report down. Okay, now as you go on a little farther down, you have historical events. Okay, so again, you're going to have events that happened on July 4th. Okay, the American Revolution, the United States Declaration of Independence is adopted by the Second Continental Congress. Okay, so you can see famous historical events that happened on the 4th of July. Okay, so like I say, if all you're really interested in is the things that happened in your own file on a birthday, you can do that. If your database is decent size, you may actually be able to see, oh, look here's all the things that happened on my birthday. or on this child or grandchild's birthday. You know, kind of here's things from our family that happened on the same day you were born, to kind of get those grandchildren or whatever a little bit more interested in their family history. Okay, let's go ahead, and I'm going to move on now to the descendant list. Okay, now RootsMagic has had a descendant list since day one, but we've added some new options. And actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out here and I'm going to start with this James Smith. So in other words, I want to print a descendant list for James Smith, which means I want him, his children, their children, their children, and their children, and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and select him, and I'm going to do a descendant list. Now, we've always been able to do the full descendant list and so on. And so I'm going to go ahead and generate this report so you can see this is basically what a descendant list has always looked like in RootsMagic. You've had your starting person, and then your spouse, and then their children and spouses, and then grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and so on. So you've been able to do this all along. Well, what I want to do is show you some of the options that we've added since then. Okay, one of the options that we've added is this numbering style. Now, in the past, this numbering style was always generations. First generation, second generation, third, fourth, and fifth. Well, what we've done is we've added some other descendant numbering systems. So you might want to go with an outline. Okay, if you go with an outline, that's going to give you, 1, 2, 3 in Roman numerals, then capital letters, then regular numbers, then lowercase, then lower Roman numerals. So you can use this outline numbering if you'd like. Okay, you can also use what's called Henry numbering. Okay, and Henry numbering is where the first person's number is 1, and that person's children are 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 7, and so on. Okay, his children would be 171, 172, 173. Their children 172, 1721, and so on like that. Now, what's nice about Henry numbering is that if I look at Sylvia Smith, I can see that she was the third child of the second child of the second child of the seventh child of the starting person. Okay, so that's basically what those numbers mean. Each one of those numbers mean what order they were within their family in that particular generation. Now, one thing that's a problem with Henry numbering is once you get past 9, once you've used up 9 children, you can't just go to 0 and then 1 and 2 because, you can't go to 10, 11, and 12 because if you went to 11, you don't know whether that means 1711 or 1711. In other words, was it the first child of the first child of the seventh child of the first, or was it the 11th of the seventh of the first? So with Henry numbering, you have this kind of little weird thing where once you get past 9, you move to letters, A, B, where A is going to be the 10th child, B is the 11th, and so on. So that's where this last numbering system, this D'Aubeville numbering system, comes into play. And what that does is that gets around that problem by putting a period between each generation. So when you get down here, you can use 1.7.9, 1.7.10, 1.7.11. By having the little decimal points there, you can use 10 and 11 without confusing that, the first child of the first child or the 11th child. The disadvantage, of course, of this is that your numbers can actually, when you go out many generations, those numbers can get quite a bit larger because you're throwing that extra decimal point in and making that number a lot wider than if you just had a single digit for each one of those. Okay, so those are that's new, the new numbering system in the descendant reports. Okay, the other thing that's new in the descendant reports is an option right here, this last option. In the past, you could have it print the person's name with their birth and death date afterwards, and that's the way we have it right here. See, we have their name with their birth date and their death date. But you can also change that to do the name, the birth, death, and death dates in columns. If we did like that, that gives you that information in columns. You could also do things like having each one of them on a separate line. Okay, now this has all been in there before, but what's new is this option right here, this word wrapped. And what this does is let you put much more information, basically as much information as the one where it would use up 4 lines for each person, except it word wraps it, okay, which makes it take a lot less room. So you can squeeze a lot of information into much less room. So I can have the person with their date and place of birth, their date and place of death, their marriage information. I can put all of that information in without having this take tons and tons and tons of room, because it's going to word wrap each line. Okay, the last item I want to show, and I'm actually going to go back to this simpler one so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. One of the big requests we've gotten in the past is to do what's called a direct line descendancy list. Okay, full descendancy means I'm going to take this starting person and I am going to print that person, their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and so on. In other words, that full tree going down. Well, what a direct line descendancy does is says, I'm going to take that ancestor way out there, in this case, James Smith, and I want to pick a single descendant. In other words, a single person kind of in the current generation or something, and I only want to see the descendancy going from that ancestor to that descendant. Okay, and so when I select direct line descendancy, I have an additional button here to pick that descendant. Dr. James Smith is kind of the starting person in this fake file. So I'm going to go ahead and generate that, and you're going to see that instead of having James and all of his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on, it's going to have James, the one child that is in Dr. James Smith's line, and then the grandchild, the great-grandchild, and the great-great-grandchild, and so on. Okay, so in other words, if I want to know how James Smith goes back to, or Dr. James Smith goes back to James Smith, I go and I say, there's his dad and his mother, there's his dad's dad and mother, there's his dad's dad and mother, and then goes back to that other starting person. Now, one thing that's nice about this, you'll notice, is that I left this on the Dobbleville numbering, and so you can actually follow this 1.7, 1.7.2, 0.2.2, 0.2.2.1. The numbering system does not start just stripping out stuff. So I can see that this is the direct line, but I know that Dr. James Smith is the first child of the second, of the second, of the seventh, of the first. So I can tell by looking at this that it's actually the seventh child, and that's that person's second child, and that person's second child, and that person's first child. So we leave that numbering intact on that direct line descendancy so that you can kind of keep track. Now you can mix and match all of these different options that I've shown you. So if I wanted to go down here and use that full word wrap thing, I could do that, and so I can see all of that detail for each of these people in this line. Okay, so those are some of the new features that we've added in the descendant list. Okay, let's step on. We're going to move to the place list, and again, under reports, it's under lists because it's a place list. We're going to come down here to the place list, and in the place list, we've always been able to give you a number of different things. You've been able to print all the places in the whole database. We've also been able to always print all the places in the database, including all the events in each of those places. You know, so if I wanted to do that, I just say generate the report. It's going to go through and it's going to give me a list of every place in my database along with the events that happened in each of those places. Okay, You've also been able to pick a single place and print all of the events in that place. But what we've added that's new is the ability to print events that are near a place. So if I go to here, I can come in and I can say, let me go ahead and delete this out of here so I can kind of show you how this is going to work. I can come and say, I want you to print all the places and events that are within 50 miles of, and I can pick a place. So I'm going to go ahead and say Ames, Iowa. And when I tab out of that field, you're going to see RootsMagic has used its geocoding capabilities to fill that out and add the latitude and longitude. And so what I'm asking for is a list of all the events, all the places and events in my database that are within 50 miles of Ames, Iowa. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and generate the report, and there we go. So based on the latitude and longitude, this is going to give me, there's Avon, Polk, Iowa, there's Ames, Story, Iowa. Okay, and so you're going to be able to do that. Now, one other thing that's nice in this is we've also added the ability to include these place details. So for Ames, Iowa, we have all of these events that happened in Ames, Iowa, but a few of these events right here, we actually had entered not only Ames, Iowa, but we had entered place details, street addresses for these two residences. And so if I tell it to include the place details, then these events that have place details will be kept separate. It'll print all the events that just happened in Ames, Iowa without any details, but then it'll also then break out each of those details and show me the events that happened there as well. You have that option right here, print place details. So if I were to uncheck that and come into here, you'll see everything in Ames, Iowa is just grouped together. It's not broken out by place detail anymore. So that's an option that you have in the place list report. So two new options there, the ability to go in and print all the places within a certain distance of another place, and then printing the place details. Now, where does this come in handy, the printing events near a place? Okay, a lot of times finding an event that happened close to another place is not as simple as just looking for some text for that place. Okay, so for example, if you had some events or something that happened in Dearborn, Michigan, okay, you might, if you went and said, well, show me everything that's in Wayne County, Michigan, thinking, well, that's going to get me everything near Dearborn, you know, yeah, that'll get everything in that county. Or if you just say Michigan, that'll get everything in Michigan. But what you'll find is if you did this one, everything within 50 miles of Dearborn, Michigan, you might actually get a lot of places that are not only not in Dearborn, they're not in Wayne County, they're not in Michigan, they're not even in the United States. Okay, within 50 miles of Dearborn, Michigan is a lot of Canada. Okay, now without something like this where you can say print all the events that are within 50 miles of Dearborn, you may never even think to look in Canada. But by doing this, this will show you events within your database that happened within 50 miles regardless of what city, county, state, or country they happen to be in. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay, now what I'm going to show you next, this is actually a feature that we added in a recent update, and I don't believe we've even mentioned that we've added this. So if you go to reports, one of the things you can do in RootsMagic is you can create custom reports. Custom reports let you go in and select things like what data you want. So if I've created a little simple custom report here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on Edit to show. And what I've done is I've said, for each person that I include in this custom report, I want you to put 3 columns. And I want you to have a name, birth date, and death date. And this header, this is just the text that's going to actually be at the top of each page. Row 1, this means this is what the actual information I want you to print each time. So for each person in this report, in the first column, I want you to print their name, and I want you to do given name and then surname. For the second column, I want you to print their birth date, and in the third column, I want you to print their birth date, or their death date, excuse me. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and hop out of here, and I'm going to just do this simple report and include everyone. I'm going to generate this report. Now this first part right here, these people don't have birth and death dates, so let's scroll down a little bit until we see people. Here are people with birth dates and death dates. Now as I scroll down to these people who actually have this, okay, one of the things you're going to see is that it takes a little work to kind of line up everybody. So that is one of the features that we've added. If you go in to edit a custom report under options, there's two new options: draw lines between records and shade alternate records. These are new. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to tell it to shade the alternate records, okay, by not changing anything else. What that's going to do is that is going to give me every other record is going to be shaded. Now, I don't advise you on reports like this that have a single line to use both the shading and the drawing lines. The drawing lines, if you turn that on, it's going to draw a line between each one of these records. That can kind of be overkill. The drawing lines, though, is really useful if you happen to create custom reports which are more than one row. Okay, you can create custom reports that have 5 or 10 or 15 rows for each person. You know, I mean, all you'd have to do is come into here and edit your report, and you could just say, I want to add another row. So, let's go ahead and add another row, and I can go ahead and add another row, and I could come in and say, let's put this as birthplace, and let's come over here, and let's go ahead and change this to death. All right, here it is, death place. Okay, so I've got two rows. So now when I generate this report, okay, you can see as you get down here, it starts to get a little more crowded. Now the shading is nice for this as well, but this is a place where it might be worth, especially as you get even more than two, it might be worth going ahead and drawing those lines between records. And that's going to give you something like this, where it actually makes it much more clear which of these pieces of data out here belong to which record. Okay, so you can mix and match. If you're happy with just the shading, go ahead and do that. If you want to just do the blank lines or the lines between each record, you can do that, or you can use a combination of both. So we've added that feature to the custom reports. Okay, another thing we've added, I'm going to go back to lists, and we've actually done this in several places. Several reports, there's several reports, that being the Ahnentafel, the Descendant List, the individual list, but there's several reports where when you would print it, it wouldn't include those place details. Excuse me. It wouldn't include those place details. And so if you were printing out a report, you would just see the city, the county, and the state, but you wouldn't have the place details. So this option gives you the ability to include those place details so that you can have that. Now, the other thing we've done with place details is one of these reports, and actually I'm going to come back down here. I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to do this Ahnentafel and tell it to include those place details. So you can see right here, this person it shows was this person was born in St. Mark's Hospital. Before, it would only show you London, England. So now you have the option. If you want those place details, you can do that. But the other thing that's great that we've added is under the indexes. Now, when you go into the indexes for any of these reports, you'll usually have the ability to add a name index and a place index. And when you do that, let me go ahead and hop out of here. Actually, I'm going to come turn this off so you can kind of see the difference. If I were to generate this report, when I go down to the indexes, okay, there's the index of names, so everybody's name is going to be in there. But then you have your index of places. And so you'll see ones like this, England, London. Okay, so it says, okay, on page 1 of London, England. If I click on that, it's actually going to take me to that report where I can actually see it. There it is right there. But if I want to, I can go in here and I can tell it I want to include those place details. And when I do that, what it's going to do is when I come down here to London, England, you'll see London, England now has another level underneath that. That's going to be my place detail because I told it I actually want it to go all the way to the place detail level. And so that's another option. When you're printing that place index, you now have the option of actually including the place details within that index as well. Okay, the last option that I'm going to show you here, this is actually an option in both that we added to both family group sheets and narratives, and this is actually for our users who happen to be LDS. Under forms, I'm going to go into family group sheet, and narratives has the same thing. There's now an option right here to print LDS facts. And so basically what that means is that you can either check or uncheck that to have the LDS facts, baptisms and endowments and all of that stuff, to have those either print or not print in the report. You used to have to go into the master fact type list and turn each one off or on individually and then come back into the report. It was a big hassle. So we've added that ability so you can just check or uncheck that to turn those on and off just right from the report screen. Okay, so that is an overview of the new reports and kind of some of the new report options that we've added. So let me take a look at some of the comments or questions. We have one question about if there's any thoughts about adding historical events to the timeline list report. And the answer to that is yes. We actually were starting to put that in when we released version 5, but what's happened is our timeline, our historical timelines have so many events that it was basically just clobbering the report. It was burying the individual's actual information so deep within actual, this historical. I mean, you saw that one database we had with all those historical events, and you saw how many events there could be for a single day. Okay, well, it was burying the individual's information under so many events that we actually took that out. So we are looking at ways to be able to do that. And the question is would that be editable? And yes, the plan would be if we, or not if, when we support putting historical events in the timelines, in the chronologies, we will make that editable so that users can pick and choose which events they actually want. Okay, can you print a descendancy list with color coding? Yes, there's a checkbox that says to whether or not you want a color code. You can see that right here. Print color coding. If you turn on color coding, then it will color code. Okay. Are there any others? Looks like a lot of these questions are actually not specific to reports, and so we're trying to keep these webinars kind of on topic. Does who was there indicate specific addresses within a city? And the answer to that is no. Who was there is where you are going to pick a city, county, state. So you're basically looking for people in your database that were at a particular city level, not down to the street level. Okay. Let's see. Another question about creating your own database of events. That we kind of covered that. Okay. Well, it looks like like I say, there's several questions. There's several questions here about are we considering various things, whether it's DNA, specific chart types, that type of thing? The answer is yes. We are always considering new reports of all different types. So in terms of different wall chart types, in terms of DNA types of things, yes, we are considering all of those. And so as we get those, we will be putting those in. So I guess it looks like that's about what I have here. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for this reports. We're going to take a couple of weeks off. We've got some conferences and things, but our next webinar is actually one I'm really excited about, and that is going to be how to properly cite the 1940 census. Okay, that's the census that was just released on April 2nd, and on that webinar we're actually going to take a particular census, 1940 census page, and we're going to show you how to transfer the data from that census page into a citation and everything you're going to want to do in order to properly cite that. And so I hope you'll join us for that. And again, thanks for joining us.